This happened during my senior year of high school. It was the only lockdown I have ever experienced that turned out to be real, and even now I can't walk through a school hallway without thinking about it. The day started normally. It was a Thursday afternoon, and I was sitting in my history class waiting for the final bell. We were working on a project, and most of us were barely paying attention. People were talking, some were on their phones, and our teacher was grading papers at her desk. Then the intercom came on. At first, nobody reacted. Schools did lockdown drills all the time, so everyone assumed it was another practice. But the second our teacher heard the announcement, her face changed completely. She stood up immediately and locked the classroom door. That got everyone's attention. Within seconds, she turned off the lights and told us to move to the storage room in the back of the classroom. The room wasn't very large. It was normally used to store textbooks, old desks, and supplies. There wasn't enough space for 25 students, but somehow we all squeezed inside. Our teacher shut the door behind us and told everyone to remain silent. For the first few minutes, nobody seemed scared. People whispered to each other and made jokes. That changed when we started hearing sirens outside. Then came the messages. Students from other parts of the school were texting friends and family. Rumors spread quickly. Someone claimed there was a man with a weapon on campus. Another student said police were searching the building. Nobody knew what was actually happening. The uncertainty made everything worse. As the minutes passed, the room became unbearably quiet. Nobody wanted to be the person making noise. The storage room had no windows and almost no light. The only illumination came from phone screens that students occasionally checked under their shirts. An hour passed, then another. The longer we sat there, the more exhausted everyone became. Some students were crying, others were silently staring at the floor. I remember checking my phone and seeing messages from my parents asking if I was okay. I didn't know what to tell them. At some point, I started feeling cramped and shifted my position against a shelf. That's when I noticed something strange. There seemed to be more people in the room than I remembered. I know that sounds ridiculous. 25 students packed into a small space can feel like 50. I convinced myself I was imagining it. Eventually, I stopped thinking about it. Nearly 2 hours after the lockdown started, we finally received word that officers were clearing rooms and preparing to evacuate the building. The relief inside that storage room was immediate. People started texting their families. Some students were crying again, this time because they thought it was finally over. A few minutes later, police officers entered the classroom. They instructed us to leave the storage room one at a time and keep our hands visible. We followed every instruction without question. Nobody wanted to take any chances. The officers escorted us outside to a parking lot across the street where students were being gathered and identified. That's when everything got strange. Our teacher began taking attendance. At first, it seemed like a routine head count. Then she stopped speaking. She looked confused. She counted again. Then again. One of the officers asked if something was wrong. She looked at him and said there were too many students. Everyone laughed. We assumed she was stressed. The officer asked how many students should be in the class. She told him 25. There were 26 people standing in the group. The officer immediately started checking names. One by one, students responded. Every name on the roster was accounted for. But there was still one extra person. Nobody understood how that was possible. The officers separated us and counted again. Same result. 26 people. One person didn't belong. The strange part was that nobody could identify who it was. The extra person wasn't standing there anymore. It was as if they had disappeared during the evacuation. At that point, the officers stopped treating it like a mistake. Several students were interviewed individually. So was our teacher. Police reviewed security footage from the building. A few days later, details started spreading through the community. What investigators discovered was far worse than anyone expected. The cameras showed an adult male entering the school shortly before the lockdown began. He wasn't a student. He wasn't a teacher. He wasn't a parent. Nobody recognized him. The footage showed him moving through several hallways while officers were searching other parts of the building. Then the cameras captured something that still makes me uncomfortable to think about. The man approached our classroom. When students rushed into the storage room, he slipped inside with them. Nobody noticed. Not the teacher, not the students. Nobody. The room was dark, crowded, and chaotic. He simply blended into the group. For nearly 2 hours, he stayed inside that storage room with us. While everyone believed they were hiding from danger, the danger was already there. Investigators estimated that he spent most of the lockdown standing only a few feet away from multiple students. Several times, cameras caught him watching people directly. He never spoke. He never touched anyone. He never attempted to leave. He just stood there, waiting. The footage ended when officers arrived to evacuate the classroom. During the confusion of students being moved outside, the man slipped away and disappeared into the crowd. Despite a massive search, police never found him. No fingerprints, no identification, no explanation. The case eventually went cold. Most people moved on. I wish I could say I did too. A few months later, one of the investigators gave a presentation to students and staff about school safety. During the presentation, someone asked if they had ever figured out why the man chose our classroom. The investigator hesitated before answering. Then he said something that completely changed the way I looked at the incident. According to the footage, our classroom wasn't the first one he approached. It was the fourth. He had looked inside several other rooms before reaching ours. The investigators believed he was searching for something specific, or someone specific. The room he eventually entered wasn't random. For whatever reason, he chose ours. To this day, nobody knows why. And sometimes I still think about those 2 hours we spent packed together in that dark storage room. 25 students believed they were hiding from a threat somewhere else in the building. What none of us realized was that there were actually 26 people in that room, and one of them was never supposed to be there. I was a sophomore in high school when this happened. Even now, years later, I still get nervous whenever I receive a message from an unknown number. The lockdown started shortly after lunch. At first, nobody thought it was real. Our school conducted drills several times a year, and the announcement sounded exactly like the ones we'd heard before. That changed when our teacher locked the classroom door, turned off the lights, and told everyone to get away from the windows immediately. The room went silent. Nobody was laughing anymore. We moved into a corner of the science lab where we couldn't be seen from the hallway. There were 19 students in the room, along with our teacher. We sat there quietly while rumors spread through text messages. Some students claimed there was a weapon involved. Others said police had surrounded the school. Nobody knew what was actually happening. After about 45 minutes, my phone vibrated. I almost ignored it. The message came from a number I didn't recognize. At first, I assumed it was spam. Then I opened it. The message contained only one sentence. "You're in room 214. My stomach tightened immediately. I looked around the classroom. The sign beside the door clearly said room 214. I didn't respond. I figured it had to be a coincidence. Maybe one of my friends was trying to mess with me. A minute later, another message arrived. There are 19 students in there. I felt a chill run through me. I quickly counted. 19. Exactly 19. I remember looking around the room, trying to figure out who could be sending the messages. Everyone seemed focused on their phones or staring at the floor. Nobody appeared to be paying attention to me. Then another message appeared. Your teacher is standing next to the supply cabinet. I slowly raised my head. My teacher was standing exactly where the message described. At that point, I started feeling genuinely scared. I still tried to convince myself it was a prank. Maybe somebody in the room was doing it. Maybe they could see me checking my phone. Then another text arrived. The boy in the red hoodie keeps looking at the door. I looked over. One of the students was wearing a red hoodie, and he had been staring at the door almost non-stop. I could feel my heartbeat speeding up. A few seconds later, another message appeared. The girl beside the sink is crying. I glanced across the room. One of the girls had tears running down her face. I didn't know what to think anymore. The messages continued. Each one became more specific than the last. It felt like somebody was standing inside the room watching us. Then my phone vibrated again. I opened the message. The second I read it, I felt sick. You should stop checking your phone. My hands immediately started shaking. Nobody could have seen my screen. I was sitting on the floor with my phone hidden in my lap. The room was dark. There was no way someone outside could know exactly what I was doing. For the first time, I considered showing the messages to my teacher. I quietly got her attention and handed her my phone. As she read through the texts, I watched the color drain from her face. She didn't say anything. She simply took screenshots and used the school's emergency communication app to contact administrators. Several minutes later, she received a response. The administration advised her to remain in lockdown and forward the number to law enforcement. For the next hour, no more messages arrived. The silence was almost worse. I kept staring at my phone, waiting for it to vibrate again. Eventually, officers began clearing classrooms and evacuating students. When we finally left the building, I felt relieved for the first time all day. I assumed the whole thing would end there. It didn't. A few days later, investigators interviewed me about the messages. They told me they had traced the phone number. I expected them to say it belonged to another student. Instead, they told me something much stranger. The phone had been located somewhere inside the school during the lockdown. Not outside, not in the parking lot, inside the building. The problem was that nobody could find it. Weeks passed before they finally discovered the source. One of the maintenance workers reported a hidden access panel behind an unused storage area between two wings of the school. It wasn't a place students could normally reach. When investigators opened it, they found a narrow space large enough for a person to live in. Inside were blankets, bottled water, food wrappers, flashlights, portable chargers, and several old phones. Someone had clearly been staying there for a long time. What they found next was even worse. The walls were covered with photographs, hundreds of them. Students walking through hallways, students sitting in class, students eating lunch, students leaving school. Every photograph had been taken without the subjects knowing. Investigators later estimated that some of the photos were months old, others were only days old. Then they found the section dedicated to me. There were dozens of photographs pinned to the wall. Pictures of me entering the school, leaving class, talking to friends, sitting alone during lunch. Someone had been tracking my routine. One of the investigators showed me the final photograph they recovered. It had been taken the morning of the lockdown. In the picture, I was walking toward room 214. Written underneath the photo was a note, just one sentence. She always sits in the back corner. The handwriting matched several notes found throughout the hidden space. The person responsible was never identified. No fingerprints matched anyone in the system. No DNA results led anywhere. Whoever had been living inside the walls disappeared before police found the area. The school eventually renovated that section of the building. The hidden space no longer exists. But sometimes, I still think about that final message. Not because it was threatening, not because it mentioned my classroom. What scares me most is how casual it sounded. Like the person watching wasn't a stranger at all. Like they had been observing us for so long that they felt completely comfortable being there. And if they hadn't sent those messages that day, nobody would have ever discovered they were hiding inside the school. I was a junior in high school when this happened. Out of all the lockdowns we had during my time in school, this is the only one that still bothers me years later. Not because of what happened during the lockdown itself, but because of what we learned afterward. It started during 4th period English. The day had been completely normal up until that point. We were discussing a novel, and most of the class was half asleep. It was one of those slow afternoons where everyone was counting down the minutes until lunch. Then the lockdown announcement came over the intercom. The moment it happened, our teacher stopped talking and immediately locked the classroom door. Nobody laughed. Nobody assumed it was a drill. There was something about her reaction that told us this was real. She turned off the lights, closed the blinds, and instructed everyone to move away from the windows. Within less than a minute, the classroom was completely silent. We sat on the floor against the far wall while our teacher monitored updates from the school's emergency communication system. For the first 30 minutes, nothing happened. We didn't hear shouting. We didn't hear alarms, just an occasional police siren outside. The silence was almost worse because it gave everyone time to imagine what might be happening somewhere else in the building. About 40 minutes into the lockdown, our teacher received a message through the school's emergency radio. The voice identified itself as part of the administration. It instructed our class to relocate immediately to room 127 on the opposite side of the hallway. The message sounded legitimate. The person knew the proper emergency codes. They used the correct terminology. Nothing seemed suspicious. Our teacher hesitated for a moment before following the instructions. We quietly gathered our things and moved across the hall. The entire process took less than a minute. Room 127 was empty. There were no students inside, no teachers, nothing. The lights were off, and the blinds were already closed. The room looked as if nobody had entered it all day. Still, we followed instructions and settled into the corner furthest from the door. Once again, we waited. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Everything remained quiet. Eventually, our teacher's phone vibrated. She checked the screen and frowned. I remember seeing her read the message twice, then a third time. The color drained from her face. One of the students asked what was wrong. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stood up and walked toward the back of the room before finally speaking. "The administration says we're supposed to stay in our original classroom." Nobody understood what she meant. One student pointed out that we'd already been moved. Our teacher nodded. Then she told us something that instantly changed the atmosphere in the room. The administration claimed they had never instructed us to relocate. For several seconds, nobody spoke. I remember looking around and seeing the same confused expression on everyone's face. That didn't make any sense. We had all heard the order. Our teacher had responded to it. Whoever gave the instruction clearly knew which classroom we were in. More importantly, they knew how to access the school's emergency communication system. The administration immediately ordered us to remain where we were until police could verify the situation. The next hour felt endless. Every little noise made people jump. At one point, someone thought they heard footsteps outside the room. Another student claimed they saw movement beneath the door. Whether any of it was real, I have no idea. By then, everyone was terrified. Eventually, officers arrived and escorted us out of the building. The lockdown ended shortly afterward. At first, we assumed the strange radio message would be explained quickly. It wasn't. Over the next few weeks, investigators reviewed security footage and communication logs from the school. What they discovered was never released publicly, but rumors spread fast. My uncle happened to work for the district's security department, and years later he told me what investigators actually found. The voice that ordered our class to move didn't belong to any teacher, administrator, or staff member. Someone had gained unauthorized access to the emergency communication network. The message had originated from inside the building. What disturbed investigators most was what happened after we left our original classroom. Security footage showed an unidentified man entering that hallway less than 3 minutes later. He walked directly toward our classroom. Not toward the office, not toward another hallway, straight to our room. According to the footage, he stopped outside the door and looked through the narrow window. Then he remained there for almost 30 seconds, just staring inside, as if he expected people to be there. When he realized the room was empty, he walked away. Investigators never figured out how he entered the building. They never identified him. And they never discovered how he gained access to the emergency communication system. But the strangest part came later. Several days after the lockdown, a custodian cleaning room 127 discovered writing carved into one of the desks near the back of the classroom. At first, nobody thought much of it. Schools are full of old graffiti. Then one of the teachers noticed what it said. The message referenced a discussion that had taken place in our English class that very morning. Not a school event, not something public. A specific conversation that happened between our teacher and a handful of students less than an hour before the lockdown began. There was no reason anyone outside our classroom should have known about it. Investigators photographed the desk and removed it from the room. The writing was fresh. Whoever carved it had done so recently. To this day, nobody can explain how the message got there. Some people believe it was just an elaborate prank. Others think the man had somehow been watching our class long before the lockdown happened. Personally, I don't know what to believe. What I do know is this. Someone used the school's emergency system to move our class into a different room. Someone showed up at our original classroom only minutes later. And someone left behind a message proving they knew things that should have been impossible for them to know. I graduated years ago. The school is still open. Students still attend classes in those same hallways. But every time I drive past the building, I think about one question. If we had stayed in our original classroom that day, who exactly was waiting outside that door?